book. I try to ask in English, but my English is not very good. I have an old book, Bone JR, edited 1994. My question is, how was the first steps in the business for you as an author, and what's the difference between then and now?
Well, I will quickly tell you the story of how I got started. When I was younger, when I was a teenager, I may have to stand up for this at some point. When I was younger, as a teenager, I was always very, very into doing creative stuff. You know, that was what I loved. So I drew, and I played some music. I was in a band. I did theater. Later on, I did radio for a while, and probably some other things I'm not even thinking of. But I was always kind of trying to find a way to do something that I love doing and make things for a living and share them with people, which was always very important to me. And because of that, I didn't kind of go right off to college and get a degree. When I did go to University of California at Berkeley, I dropped out very quickly for various reasons because I was just more interested in what I was trying to do and trying to make these things happen. And as a result, I spent many years working a lot of really wretched jobs, really not fun jobs, you know, because you don't have if you don't want to become a full-time business person and you don't want to get a college degree, you're going to spend a lot of time folding burritos and throwing newspapers and measuring people's feet for new shoes, and that's the kind of thing that I did. But somewhere along the line, when I met the woman who would become my first marriage, and thankfully not my only marriage, thankfully, I had never lived with cats before. I had never lived with cats. I had always been more or less a dog person. Yes. Well, I mean, I just didn't have the experience. I didn't know. So my ex-wife had a couple of cats. One of whom was secretly a trans cat, but I didn't find that out until later. Most strange, you know, she always introduced them to me as male and female, and then I found out later on they were both male. I still don't know what that was about, but that was not by any means the weirdest thing about that first marriage. But anyway, so I moved in with my then girlfriend and got to know these two cats, and I was absolutely astonished and puzzled by the cat-human bargain. Now, the dog-human bargain is perfectly obvious to anybody who's ever had a dog. You have a dog, you feed them, not only do they love you, they think you are the most brilliant goddamn thing that ever existed. You know, you stand up and start towards the door, it's like, oh my God, we're going out, how did you think of that? That's brilliant, oh my God, you know. And you know, that's anything, you can do anything, you know, you can drop something on the floor, they're like, whoa! Did you do that? God, you're good. Look at that. It's just lying there on the floor. Wow, I would never have thought, you know, they're just overexcited. But they love you and they worship you like a god. Cats.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Not the same thing at all. You know, you come home and the cats are like, I think I've seen you before. Yeah, right, okay. Cool. Could you move out of my sunlight, please? You know, and that's basically how it works. I mean, I have both. So, you know, I mean, I am no longer, I wasn't anti-cat ever. It was just very mysterious. So anyway, sitting around in this apartment and working all these weird jobs, and most of them in the middle of the night, I kind of had this idea of like, what would cats' view of the world be? How would they see things? What would their mythology be? And this was just purely to entertain myself because I'm strange that way. You know, I like to do things like that. So I kind of played around with this idea. Of course, cats would think that humans were essentially failed cats, and that therefore that's why they were kept around to serve cats, you know, because cats didn't want to bother with a can opener. You know, that's why they had humans, you know, that kind of thing. And then I kind of played around with it. And then later on, I decided I wanted to try to write a book because a lot of the jobs, and not jobs, but the creative things that I enjoyed doing, I could not do sometimes because they were group activities. And it was at a time in my life and many of my friends and creative partners' lives where things were always in flux, and it's like you work all day or you work all night and you make it to band practice. It's like, oh, the bassist broke up with his girlfriend. We're not going to see him for a couple of weeks, man. He's really down. I'm like, good God, do you know how hard I worked to get here? How many jobs I have, and this guy's still in school and he's like can't show up for practice. Anyway, so I became slightly impatient with doing things always with other people, and I realized that writing and drawing were the two things I could concentrate on my own time, and I was working really weird hours, answering telephones, at an answering service and waiting tables and stuff. So I went ahead and started Tail Chaser's Song, which was my first book. Tom Jäger und Goldfilter, and so I sent it off to, I didn't know much about publishing or how to get into the book business. I didn't have any connections. I didn't go to science fiction conventions or anything. I was just on the outside looking in, and I said, well, I'll take a couple of the really good publishers that I know are publishing this kind of thing and send it to them. So I sent it to the first one, and I got it back in record time. They were incredibly not interested in the book. They were a bit dismissive. I don't want to be too mean about it, but they were kind of like, well, we don't do animal fiction, but if this were a bestseller, we might make an exception, but it's obviously not a bestseller. 40 years. 40 years that book's been in print. But anyway, I'm not bitter. Yeah, I'm bitter. Anyway, so that came back immediately. So I sent it to the next publisher on my list, which was Daw Books in America, which was founded by Donald A. Walheim, who is one of the great editors of science fiction in America. He was, Isaac Asimov's editor and Heinlein's editor, and he did all kinds of stuff. And Philip K. Dick and all kinds of favorites of mine. So I sent it off to Daw. Didn't know at the time that they were actually a very small publishing company, basically a family company. So after 6 months or so of not having heard back, I hadn't been rejected, but I hadn't heard back either. And in those days, you could only send to one publisher at a time because they would talk to each other. If they found out you were doing multiple submissions, they would send them all back. So, in a fit of like, oh my God, I've been waiting so long, why won't they tell me if they want it or not? I came up with a cunning plan. And my cunning plan was I wrote to them, because this is in the old days when, you sent a typed manuscript, or you sent a photocopy, but it was, you couldn't just print them off real easily. So I sent a letter to Daw in New York and said, hi guys, I'm really sorry to bother you, but we've been having terrible floods in California, and my cellar was flooded and my only copy of my manuscript was destroyed. Now, anybody here who's ever been to California knows we don't do flood. We do not do flood. Most of the time we are literally dying of drought and sizzling like bacon. We don't do floods, but I figured they're in New York. They're on the other side of the country, right? And we don't have cellars either. There are no basements in California, They're just, unless you're a serial killer, then you might actually put one in for yourself to hide the bodies in. But most people do not have cellars or basements in California. So I sent this to Dawn. I said, could you please photocopy my manuscript, which you still have, figuring that it was probably propping up the short leg on a desk somewhere, and they'd have to at least go find it. And they kindly did. They sent me back a photocopy of the manuscript. I only found out years later that somebody who became my dear friend, my publisher's husband, Betsy Walheim is my publisher, her husband Peter Stamfel, one of the loveliest human beings on the planet, they did not have a feed for their copying machine. So he had to take every damn page of that thing and put it on, click, 500 pages or whatever, and do it that way. I finally...
Have you apologized?
I did. I waited until I had sold a lot of books for Daw, and then I finally said, Peter, I have to tell you something. And to Peter's blessed good credit, he laughed. After he finished kicking me, he laughed. But so anyway, so a few months later, I got a letter back from Donald Walheim, who I said was one of the great names in the field, and they bought it. They bought Tail Chaser's Song, and at that point, I was working on a second novel, which was set in 18th Dynasty Egypt. And 18th Dynasty, those of you who don't know Egypt, it's the one with Tutankhamun and Akhenaten and Nefertiti and all the, the shiny Hollywood Egyptians, right? Fascinating period, and very obscure because Akhenaten was so controversial and so hated that they chiseled his name and stuff off of all the inscriptions and blah. So we still don't really know when he died or what happened to him or what happened to Nefertiti. And this was, 35, 40 years ago, so it was even easier to fake it back then. Nobody knew anything about them. So I'd started that. And the publishers said, we'd like to offer you a contract to write some more stuff for us. They said, what are you working on? And I said, I'm working on a novel about 18th Dynasty Egypt. And over the phone, I could just hear the frost growing. And Betsy said, and she denies it to this day, but this is true, and she will occasionally claim, maybe I did say it, but it was a joke. She said, do you want to go back to the gutter we found you in? Betsy is one of my dearest friends. I tease her about that all the time, and she's always going, I wouldn't have said that. Or if I did, it was a joke. And I'm like, it didn't bother me, Betsy. I knew what you were saying, which was basically, we're offering you money to write a science fiction novel. You're a bit, Tail Chaser's Song hadn't even come out yet at that point. So she said, is there anything that we publish that you would like to write? And I said, well, I have very complicated ideas about epic fantasy in general. And I have a lot of kind of things I would like to work out of my system about epic fantasy. So would you like one of those? And I'm about to say something embarrassing about myself again. She said, oh, yeah, it sounds really good. And I said, okay, I will send you an outline. And I sent her this outline for this book that at the time was going to be called The Sons of Prester John. And Betsy looked at the outline and said, it looks really interesting. How many volumes do you think it's going to be? And I said, it's only going to be one book. And she said, Tad, your outline was 125 pages long. And lots of that just said things like, and then a bunch of other adventures happened. This is not going to be one book. And needless to say, she was right, but I still haven't learned that lesson. So anyway, so that's how I got started.
And what's the difference between now? You said, I am Ted Williams, here's my new book, or is it automatically that they buy it, or
today, when I go to see my publishers, they have little children scatter rose petals in front of me, and a choir imitating the angel. No, it's not like that. I have had a very long relationship, with my American publishers. I'm with the same publishers still after all these years. And part of that is because I trust them and I know them. And they're really good people and they're also really smart publishers. So, I can almost always tell them I want to write something. But they're part of a bigger corporate structure too, even though they're a small company. So there always has to be an outline. There always has to be, at least the pro forma thing that they could say, no, forget it. They haven't, thank God, but that could happen. The main thing is that when you do this as long as I do it, or you've been in the business as long as Deborah's been in the business, there are peaks and valleys, so there were points of time where I was the new young thing, I was the hot moment, and then there are other times where it's like, Tad Williams, he's alive, and one of the reasons that Deborah was saying, why don't you write another Osterlard book is because at the time I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. If I had my druthers, much as I love everything that I've done, because I never write a book unless I'm in love with the story. I couldn't do it otherwise. otherwise, not for that length of time. But I oftentimes want to do things that are completely different. You know, there are times I wanted to write a horror novel. I want to write a novel about where and when I grew up. And, you know, there's all kinds of other ideas. I have other science fiction ideas that are closer to hard science fiction. There's all kinds of things that I would like to do, and I would be all over the shop. But the other thing that happens is when you develop, when you have a career, and in our case, Deb and I, a career where, you know, it's primarily our primary income, and we have kids and a house and all that stuff, you also have to say, what can I sell? You know, you can't always just be doing whatever, well, you could. And then eventually you'd be living in a refrigerator box under a freeway overpass. So you have to use some discretion and say, what do readers want to read? And what can I do that I will really like doing that will also find readers out there? So I am by no means one of the anything I want, I get kind of people in the field. On the other hand, I have been doing this a long time. I have had you know, enough success that I don't have to prove myself to publishers anymore. I have good relations with the publishers that I have hung on to or who have hung on to me. So no complaints. I've made a living doing this since 1990, and very happy with it. Wouldn't change it for anything. There is nothing better than being able to make something out of your own head and then share it with people and have them actually like it, a lot of them, and tell you so.